Oh, I have to shout, change my voice.
Right, good.
Yeah.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Climate, Community, Safety and Cultural Scrutiny panel. Thank you very much for coming here on this sweltering day in the evening, and the temperature's just gone down. I apologise that we don't have any air conditioning. Yeah, let's try to see if we can raise the windows up a bit.
Probably got it.
Right, please note that this meeting may be filmed or recorded by the council for live or subsequent broadcast by the council's internet site or by anyone attending the meeting using any communication method. Although we ask members of the public recording, filming or reporting on the meeting not to include public seating areas, members of the public attending the meeting should be aware that we cannot guarantee that they will not be filmed or recorded by others attending the meeting. Members of the public participating in the meeting, examples, making deputations, asking questions, making oral protests, should be aware that they are likely to be filmed, recorded, or reported on. So, by entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you are consenting to being filmed for the possible use of those images and sound recordings. We have nobody from the public here at the moment, but we do possibly have some people online. The chair of the meeting has the discretion to terminate or suspend the filming or recording if, in his or her opinion, continuation of the filming, recording, or reporting would disrupt or prejudice the proceedings, infringe the rights of any individuals, or may lead to the breach of legal obligation by the council. Apologies for absence. I do not or have not received any. Apart from who said he will be joining online. I don't know if you got that.
Councillor Clark will join us later online.
Okay.
The item. And apologies from Councillor Roger, Councillor Drakis, and Councillor Dunstall. Councillor Lyons is here as a substitute for Councillor Drakis.
Understand. Items. Sorry, I interrupted.
There's people out there talking, that's the noise.
Okay. So they can't hear them there. But if I need to amplify my okay. Items of urgent business. The chair will consider the original of any late items of urgent business. Late items will be considered. New items will be dealt with as noted below. Declarations of interest. Thank you very much, Councillor Harrison. Shutting the door. A member of a disclosable procuring interest or prejudiced interest. Anybody's got any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Move on. Deputations, petitions, presentations, or questions. Do we have any?
None of those, Chair.
Okay. Can I ask people to look at the minutes from page 1 to 6 to approve the minutes of the previous meeting?
A question, Chair, or query about the attendees. Councillor Drakis was present, but he's not mentioned. Councillor Calderwell wasn't present. Pretty sure he was online.
Okay, let me check that. Fair enough.
And Valerie was
Online.
Is it
present, but online as well.
Yes, okay. Okay.
Could I follow up an action on page 4, Chair?
Okay.
Could I ask Mark about the footway gullies?
Yeah, they're cleaned back in March. They're part of the annual cleansing programme, so they're due to be done again in February 2024.
Just to follow up from that, if I may, certainly the gullies in Haringey Passage weren't done in March. To my knowledge, I've not seen them cleaned for years.
Okay.
And I made a point of checking today, knowing there was a meeting, and the ones that I'm aware of as being blocked are still very blocked. So I can't believe they were done in March.
No, well, I checked on the information today just to make sure I was up to date in seeing this meeting, and that's what I did. But if you can some details for the ones I've blocked up, we can still.
Can I just interject and ask, how do you receive the information online that these are being checked? Or who does the checks and balances
So,
out in the community?
We've got a clerk who works who goes around and who monitors a lot of the work that Margaret Highways do, cleansing of ordinary gullies. What we do is do a spot check on a proportion of those. So we wouldn't necessarily walk up and down.
Okay.
Places to make sure they fit the gully.
Okay, so maybe.
So I'll pass that message back to them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Chair, this is serious because as councillors, when we put a member inquiry or somebody brings to attention and they tell us it's been done in March and it's obviously wrong information, how can that be? Is it a matter of somebody made a mistake or simply they just put all the people we wanted to hear?
Outside the movements, that some of the gullies have been cleared, not all of them. So there's clearly a need to go out. And I'll pass them to the drainage team tomorrow, so they'll be on top of this straight away.
I think councillor, you have to look at as the spot checks need to be looked at. That maybe they don't need to be spot checked anymore, but all checked. Because then that gives you the reassurance that everything is done, opposed to hit and miss. I think that might be a different strategy if that's available. Is there anything else in the next one?
Sorry, Chair, can I ask, when the sort of annual stuff's being done now, they do the red and green marking, which is quite useful. Just wondering whether they do that with the footway ones as well, and when that started, because it does, at least on occasion where people have suggested that, you know, they move their cars and no one's come, but actually we can now say, well, go outside, you can have a look at what we have. It is quite useful if that was the case with the pavement ones as well, if they were doing it that way.
Yeah, they wouldn't have to go for a parking suspension on those necessarily, because they'd probably be dug in a way.
Sure, but do they spray paint them in the way that they're spray painting them now? Because that's only research. Okay,
That's something I could do.
yeah,
So those markets would wear off fairly quick anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Frankly.
Any other questions?
The other thing, Chair, was there was another action in there for me in relation to issue.
Oh, yes.
The drainage team have been in touch with TfL and suggested that we actually have a combined sustainable drainage system scheme incorporating 76 grade for the open space. So the message I got through today is TfL's response, they do not want any maintenance work for their network, where the reliance on a third party risk for a jointly owned asset, and others that don't really want to work with us on that plan. We can't control how TfL look after their assets. So as a consequence of that, we've sent the TfL the section 19 of flooding. But at the time, TfL reported there was no flooding to the A10 because of the rainfall we had in July. The Environment Agency survey of the flood map shows there's a 1 in 30 year storm at the junction of Seven Sisters to Brook Lane, and we've passed that on to TfL to rethink their position.
Okay, and the hope that what? That if
No, if they change their mind and that they're actually working with us and actually putting in a sub scheme and a sensible location using our land.
I
We
don't
should be working together on.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I don't see the properties of it. But in the event that we do not policy, how are we going to, what's the contingency?
Well, we don't have no control over what TfL do. It's their own effort, so we can only ask them and suggest. We can't force them to do anything that they don't want to do.
My reservation is affecting our constituents.
I appreciate that, Kaz.
We have
This is a problem we have in relation to working with, like I said, Transport for London, and the local authority has been working with National Highways as well.
The councillor Crowley.
If it was said that was the resolution and that's going in on Haringey land, that can't go in on Haringey land anyway, regardless of which.
We can probably make some use of that space.
Yeah.
What we also want to do is try and tie into that as best we can and actually make sure that Transport for London has taken into consideration the systems we can put in place and help that flooding as and when it occurs. But if they don't want to, put any changes to their infrastructure,
especially.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark, and I'll pick that up with you, maybe outside in a separate, perhaps, email trail or communication. Is how we address that. Okay. And moving on up to recent cabinet decisions. And received a report, which we think, sorry, I missed something. Thank you. Okay, then, so yes, this is the one that I'm very interested in. So the Baroness case review update on the council's response. I have been able to read it. And over to you, is it Aaron?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, and happy September to committee members. Big conscious we have the opposition leader here and the compromise, so we all have to be on our best behaviour. My neighbour, both neighbours actually, to both. The context of this conversation is a report that was commissioned, obviously not by us, looking into behaviour and the conduct of the police. So our ability to answer specific conversations about how police operate is obviously limited. But for me to tell colleagues having chaired scrutiny committees and now being on the other side how to do things. I think the reflection would have been helpful from the police here to have had a back and forth, because much of what I'm going to tell you this evening is what I've raised with the police and actually what I've written to council and shared on their based issues. So our ability to explain and shape some of the answers which we're looking for will be reduced or limited actually. But the police aren't here. But
why the police are not here?
well, they come to the next meeting, I think.
This were already scheduled for the next meeting.
Yes.
And actually, this meeting, the council was meeting one, as for the and then use that.
Okay, okay,
So I'm happy to do that. So
thank you.
the first thing we need to say is that Joe Benmore and Hubert Malcolm, the two officers who work primarily with me on these issues, one's had a bereavement, another one's had an issue resulting in surgery for most of the day, so neither will be with us. Gavin has stepped in. This is probably not his area of expertise, although the area he covers he'd be good at. But thank you for putting in for Joe and Hubert today. I want to just say a couple of things, and then I hope I'll invite us to read the papers so we can go straight to questions. So I think that's probably it. First thing to say is I am pleased that this has been put on the agenda. Like everyone in this room and a lot of people across London and actually across the country, when they saw some of the reports in the newspapers, the misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, all the different elements of horrendous mindsets, approaches from people who are there to keep us safe. A small view, but nonetheless, there was a culture there, as is evidenced by the review from Baroness Casey, caused a lot of concern to a lot of people, not least us. I am one of the few members of Haringey Council who has been stopped and searched as a young black man growing up in this community. I know what it's like to be stereotyped by, and I'm very conscious the small number of people who behaved in this certain way. I think that lived experience to me has helped shape the approach we've taken to the police. So the leader and I take an officer's taken an approach, which is we're there to be a critical friend. We're not there to be making excuses for them. We're not there to be at the same time sitting silently, just nodding and letting them do their thing. It is there are a number of very sometimes frank, sometimes difficult conversations about what we hear from our participants and what we expect from the police. And I have written to and updated councillors on many of those conversations. So I know you will have those updates in your inboxes, and I don't want to waste time repeating what I've said then. But there was obviously no great responsibility in us as councillors and to play our part in helping keep our community safe. That's the approach we take. And to do that, of course, you need to make sure that people live via an approach of policing by consent. For us to feel vested into how that's carried out. We need to feel that we're being respected and noticed and valued as who we are, where we're from, and how we live our lives. And I think that's not just important for diverse communities like ours, but it's got to be given if we're going to make sure that we keep our community safe. And I suppose that's probably the best thing to say. The Borough Commander, excuse me, the Metropolitan Policing Commissioner has been to the borough twice in recent weeks and months. The leader and I, the chief executive leader and I, have regular meetings with the borough commander. We will often be in touch 2 or 3 times a week. There is no space for them not to understand how seriously we take what this report said, but also how we want to make sure that our relationship with them as the key stakeholders, the council, them as the police, because I think sometimes people forget that the council is not there to charge people to look into crimes. That's the police's role, and we ought not to try and do their job for them. Similarly, they wouldn't want to try and do our job for us. I think us understanding how far we can go, raising the points, holding them to account, as you will be when they come in November, as we do on a not far day-to-day basis as cabinet and see the issue of the council, to make sure that they are tapping into many of those key recommendations that came out of the report and the review, but also the simple values point which drive us as elected politicians from both parties. They're not independents, I think, are they? No, but the serious point is we have an honest and objective relationship that is regularly rolled out, lived, done, and we will continue to approach things in that way. And, you know, colleagues will have read this, we'll be able to answer as much as we can now, but I think actually in many ways, we have sought to give the police the space to respond to the review and the recommendation contained in it, but also we view ourselves as leading that check and balance, which you followed earlier at Scrutiny.
Thank you very much, Councillor Adam Geraldine. Can I call you Adam?
Adam is my name, that's fine.
Okay, Adam.
Chair.
Well, Councillor Adam.
Adam knows now, yeah, Adam now, it's fine.
I'd like to make a comment first and then ask a couple of questions, if I may. My comment is that, as Adam, as you know, I've been away a few times. I have been invited a number of times in Hendon when the police qualified and to meet the new police officers that were coming to Haringey. And one thing that always struck me is that those police officers, they were not young, apart from being very young. They came from outside London in areas where they're not aware of the mixed culture that inner London authorities like ours have.
Yes.
So in some way, we're almost alien to them and the way we are. And I always felt that how would they settle and understand the communities they're supposed to serve?
Yes, yes.
When they don't have a not only experience of life, but experience of living. And so that's for me. So I would like to for the police to be more aware when they appoint people in London boroughs like ours, to have people that live in boroughs like ours, so they understand the culture and the communities. So that's one of the things I wanted to say. The other thing I wanted to ask was, I don't think I have been invited to this public meeting. I may be wrong, because I had some family worries and concern, and with my daughter being ill, and I may have missed it, and apologize if that's the case. But when the police organize these community events, our local people will go there and talk about what's happening down their road, about mindless things. They're not going to see the bigger picture here, what we're trying to achieve, basically. And I don't know how, as a cabinet member with the police, you can make sure that the agenda, so they will know what the meeting is about. It's not about the petty crime down the road, it's about the bigger picture, if you like. And my other question is, why we don't have a police officer here to present this, speak about it, and if they, any lessons learned, you know, for them, what they're going to do about it. I mean, if it was a council service, we would spend an action plan with a name officer, date, and how we're going to implement that. And if there are resources involved, then we identify that. But this is not a council service. So why nobody's here to speak and assure us that things that we try to change, at least in Haringey and Enfield, our battle commander, which I met, she's very nice, but I like to see some more involvement, action. I don't know what is the right word. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just answer one. They're coming in November, so that.
Sorry,
They're coming in November.
I'm there. Okay.
The work come out will be here
Okay.
the following meeting.
Thank you.
I'm happy to come back to the November one, if Diary is allowed to have that proper conversation.
Yeah.
Gina, so several things there. Firstly, I think it's important just to note that, like any occupation, field, part of our life, the overwhelming, and I know you know this, I know everyone knows this, the overwhelming number of police officers are law-abiding themselves, decent, respectful people who work hard. They're public sector workers like my wife and many other people are. And I want to acknowledge the sacrifices they make and the time they've been to doing what they do to keep us safe. And I think it's important that we do acknowledge that actually most police officers do understand the communities that they serve in, and they are willing to learn where they don't. And for example, Chris in Haringey Ward is a brilliant example. Chris Silver, I think it is, the Safe Neighbourhood Sergeant. Great, it's Chris Silver. Chris Silver, yeah. There you go, it's good knowledge. He is, I think, and Ian, I hope you'll agree, a very good example of a police officer who genuinely wants to engage with and cares about the community. And I saw that when he responded to the gas leak and potential terror attack at White Red Mosque, for example. So that was someone who was going out of his comfort zone, background-wise, to make sure that he did his duty as a police officer. I think there is a wider political point about how our public sector has been hit by the last 14 years of Tory government. I think it's important for us as a Labour Lib Dem council with no Tories in sight, whatever some people may think, that we acknowledge that there have been incredible attacks on the funding model support for both councils and our ability to arbit in terms of keeping people safe and peace, but also cuts to the Metropolitan Police through Sadiq Khan as a police commissioner and mayor, which has led to difficult decisions. I mean, we'll all remember the Safe Neighbourhood teams back in 2010. There were several of them in each ward, and they were properly plugged in. We've seen year on year since 2010 those reduced and scaled back, and these are words from various Tory Home Secretaries. So that's the context in which we're operating. And if you were to speak to, as I do, police officers on a pretty regular basis, and I mean more operational PCs out there on the beat, morale is not great, partly because of what we've seen in this report and the issues raised, but also the German sense of being a public sector worker in Tory Britain in 2023. And I think that's an important context for us to factor in. Now, again, your point about making sure we have people who understand the areas they serve is a really important one. Twice in the last 18 months, I have been on Woodgreen High Road with the police as they've had recruitment pop-up stalls. And it's been fascinating watching the kind of young people who will come up and ask what's going on, or people's parents saying what's going on, and then pulling their child over to meet the police officers and take the leaflet, which is an important commitment to the public sector, which we all welcome. But there is a real effort to make sure that the police, what I've seen, and like you say, we're not police officers, we're just observing and making points along the way. There is an acknowledgement that the police has to go further and do more on making sure they look at the people they serve. And to be fair, the two drop-ins on Woodgreen High Road demonstrate to me that they are willing to at least try and do that. I think there's a lot more work to do around neutralising the image of authority and how people's uncles, dads, grandpas have been treated by the police in years gone by, and what that means, and the longer term ingrained sense of disconnect, but that is something that we all have responsibility to help address. But there is an acknowledgement that they need to do that, and they have been doing it. And I don't know how that's resulted in numbers of people standing up, but they have at least tried. Chair, there's two other questions. The meeting to which you referred back in July, all colleagues were invited to it. It was a very short notice thing.
Yeah.
It was and I think in a sign of understanding the challenges and the unique challenges Harrogate has and our history, the commissioner wanted us to be the first bar that he visited as part of his tour through London, which is why we had a pretty short time period between he's coming to, oh, by the way, this is where it's going to be. There will be more conversations and meetings over the period of time ahead. And if you do have any specifics you want to raise, you can always come to me or send me an email. And I'll make sure me officers can help link you up with the right people. But I think the police acknowledged that they could have made that. And I said, in fact, I couldn't actually make it myself because I was speaking somewhere else. And I, in no uncertain terms, had been very helpful. He told me even 3 days before when I accepted the invitation to the other event that you had given us that notice, but they said it was based on the commissioner's availability, but also his willingness and intent to come here first, which is reassuring because it shows that at the very highest levels, the challenges we face are being listened to and heard by those at the top. But I think there is a legitimate point, which is if you don't tell us in enough time, we can't necessarily be there. So you're right. And I think the police, I'm not seeking to speak for them, but my interpretation of what they've said to me is that they acknowledge that, and so they'll be making sure that there are periodic conversations coming down. And then yes, the chair answered you, the police are coming in the November meeting, so.
I'm trying, I want to ask some questions, and I'm aware that you're leaving at 7.
Well, that would be now, it's 10 past.
Okay.
But keep going, Chair, it's all right. I'll make sure everyone can answer something before I go.
Tammy wants to answer some questions. I want to ask them as well. I'll let Tammy go first. And
Surely you can, yes. I'll let them know.
okay, thank you.
I was explaining to my sitting over the panel, check it on the slate.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, I mean, like you, I've kind of been the first-hand witness and on the receiving end of some pretty horrific police violence, and whether that's at demonstrations or other events on the street that I've seen. It's like pretty shocking. And I think, although you might say that most of us are not racist, not discriminatory, the reality is that it's an institutional structure that is racist, and that's something that the commission can't even admit itself. So, do you agree that the Met Police is institutionally racist? And I guess leading on to that is that this is like happened in 1999, right? The police was found institutionally racist, and we're back here 26, 25 nearly years later without anything seeming to have changed. So I guess my question is, like, given that the police do seem unable to change over those years, of the community safety strategy and the hate crime strategy, are you going to advocate for more police power or an increased police presence as part of that review and strategy, or do you think that we need to be looking at ways of removing police from the justice and community accountability approaches that we take in the borough?
Okay, so several questions. I think anybody who has seen what's happened in recent years, but indeed the report and the content of it, the review into it will be able to conclude there has inevitably been examples of racism, misogyny, homophobia, and all the rest. So I don't think, me giving some gotcha answers is going to be interesting to anyone out there, other than, of course, we've seen examples of racism and we've got to make sure they're dealt with and sorted. And that's my role as become a member in a Harrogate context to make sure that we do that. And, the fact, and you'll know this, Tammy, from reading the emails I've sent you and all colleagues, we're not going to hide behind and provide a defence when we don't need to. We're not here to do that. I'm not police's either you or you or you or you. We're not there to make excuses for an agency that's failing our people, or have examples of where they failed to uphold values we would expect from a public service. That's not words, that's truth. And we need to make sure that and the Met Commissioner has assured me directly and other colleagues that he will do what he can to make sure that this kind of behaviour, this approach, and the examples we've seen will not be seen again. And we have responsibility, as you do, for the Ward Council, to make sure we play our part in that. And that's why this conversation is important now. Be more important when the police are here, and I will do my best when they know the date, but to be back to be part of that conversation, because we all have, all 57 of us councillors, a responsibility to be a critical friend, but also an honest broker, because we have a responsibility to keep our community safe. And we're not vigilantes. We can't go and do that. We require a sensible, respectful relationship with the police to do that on our collective behalf, citizens. So, have there been examples of racism? Do many others have direct, personal, or family and friends examples of where they've been at the receiving end of the most horrendous abuse, big mistakes? Yeah, of course, and we've got to make sure that's dealt with. And I know you agree with me that where we have seen, well, I hope you agree with me, where we've seen examples of racism and all other forms of discrimination and intolerance and disrespect, we've got to pull out. Your second question about more police power, I mean, that's, what I want to make sure we get to is a place where people can walk about our community free of fear or concern from criminals or indeed from attacks and abuse from our police. I'm not sure your question, frankly, is massively fair, because I don't think it's a question about more police power or less police power. I want the police do their job properly. And if the police do their job properly, you won't need to be having conversations about more or less, this, that, and the other. I want more decency, more respect, more civility, more humanity, as the police seek to keep us all safe. Because we aren't here to be tackling crimes as the police do. And the concern I have with some views of some people is that they think the council is there, as Councillor Adam noted, to do the police job for them. Not, but we're there to make sure that they do their job properly and fairly and with the values we would expect from a public service. So I'm not going to give you a yes or no answer. What I'll tell you is I'll make sure, as long as I'm in this job, that we hold the account to make sure they do that. We hold the police to account to make sure they do their job properly.
Okay. Just on the first question, so do you think the police is institutionalized?
I'm not going to give you a gotcha answer. I don't think anyone. You'll have seen my email, which acknowledged examples of racism clearly entrenched, clearly causing serious concern to people. And you don't need to ask me whether I feel concerned about examples of racism when my grandfather was a policeman in Jamaica, came to this country in 1941 and was spat on by colleagues he thought of him when he lived in the YMCA in Birkenhead. So I don't need to be pressed on whether there have been examples of racism. What I'm trying to tell you is it's important for me, both in my role as an objective cabinet member, but also in my role as who I am, my identity, that I'm not going to run away from calling out nonsense where we see it, and we've seen lots of it. But gotcha kind of questions like that aren't going to help us address the real serious issue here, which is making sure we hold the police to account where there are examples, as we've seen, of serious racism and all the other bigotry and discrimination to which I've referred, and we have to make sure we hold them to account until they get it sorted.
Okay, I'm going to come in here. I do find the police institutionally racist. I do find them misogynist, and I do find them homophobic. Because of my experience as a social worker for 30 years working within the mental health system, because I've been a Haringey resident since the age of 7, and I have seen the uprisings in 1985 and in 2011, and the fallout of that, my own personal experience of being assaulted by a police officer on the 2nd of August 1992, when I was 8 months pregnant on the Roundway. So I speak from a place of conviction to say, yes, I find the police institutional racist. I feel it's embedded in a structure. I do not think it's one individual. I believe it's the archetype of what's in the psyche of somebody when they view black people as subservient and irrelevant and inhumane. And we have been grappling with a lot of words from the Macpherson report in 1999 to 2023. And this old same chestnut keeps coming up again and again. Part of the problem is that if you fail to recognize that there is an issue, then you are less likely to deal with the symptoms that come with it. And this is why I feel it's really necessary for us to grab the Casey report by its horns. I'm a very, very, very proud Haringey resident. Wherever I go, I take people, wherever I roam, Tottenham will always be my home. Yet still, the things that they affiliate to Tottenham is the Broadwater Farm riots and the riots of 2011. And all of that was really that what underpinned it was the relationships that the police have with the community, especially the black community. When Stephen Macpherson was here, as the police commissioner, I saw things improve because of the relationships he started to have and he started to build. And they were not disingenuous. They were not tick box exercises. The community were able to feel it because he was working alongside them. Now, my question is, having said all of that, on page 1.74.1, it says community crime funding. And it says that we'll put more officers and police community support officers. How many have they said that they're going to put out? And what is the forecast and the strategy? Have they said anything to you about that, Adam?
They're working through that.
Okay.
I don't have the executives, and I don't think I've been presented with them. Well, no, I haven't.
Okay.
But we will look at it as an action plan.
Yes,
And if we hear in advance in November, but obviously when it comes to operational allocation of resource, that's for the police.
Yeah, they must tell us, but there's different pockets. Like I'm Seven Sisters Ward councillor, and there's lots of crime with drugs, alcohol. There's lots of, it's a disenfranchised community. It's a very marginalised community embedded in poverty, social deprivation, poor outcomes for health. And the police can be that conduit to change the outcome and the narrative, but we don't see them. They're not there as a deterrent. My surgery is always coming in, telling me about the degradation, somebody being caught having sex in an alleyway, somebody shooting up their drugs in their arm, no police presence whatsoever. And that's around Plevna, Seven Sisters Station, as you know, Stonebridge Road, that's all we hear from there. So it would be nice to see how many and what pockets they're going to do, how they're going to address.
Yeah, look, we raise these points regularly. I mean, we need to make sure that community policing actually means community policing,
Yes.
which means police in our community. We raise that point repeatedly. We also basically need to get shot of the Tory government, who doesn't seem to believe in having police properly funded in the communities, keeping people safe. But I know that there's a previous question about more or less police power. It's not about that. It's about providing assurance.
The right policing.
Thank you. In
Yeah,
the right way,
yeah.
with the values that drive us, and making sure that people know they can go about their business safely.
There's also,
And these are the points that we raise repeatedly.
there's, sorry, I just got, I don't know when I'm going to get this opportunity. Hey, I don't want to, there's the essence of training, which I pick up, Gina. I used to train the police on engaging with people with mental ill health. And you're right, they come out from the suburbs, they haven't worked with a lot of diversity. So they come in here with no fault of their own, not understanding how to land life. And I'm just interested to know, even in the point of community engagement events, how the police are going to address climatizing the new recruits to work in a diverse way. Because the heavy-handed policing, I've had to flag up with David Lammy on several occasions, and he has been so supportive in actually driving forward those complaints about the visual things that I have seen and others have seen. So I'm just wondering how we go into, what strategy the police have in place to address the lack of diversity and knowledge, and how they're going to address that in regards to keys to engagement. I mean, you probably have to go away with all of that.
That's for them to answer.
Yeah, they will answer that.
Because we wouldn't want them to answer for us if it came to
No,
our own.
I just,
But the value point is a correct one, which is in diverse communities, you want to make sure that, actually, in all communities, you want to make sure that the police are able to understand and engage with all those they're seeking to keep safe.
Yeah.
That will inevitably drive what we do. That's why we accept the recommendations of this review in full. We accepted, the mayor's accepted it, the Met Police Commissioners accepted it. And I trust all colleagues have read this, so, you know, previous question about my views are kind of relevant if you read the content of the review and the fact that we've accepted all the recommendations in it. But we will continue to make the point that our policing has to be, if our policing is to be by consent, it has to be relevant to and aware of the needs in our communities. And, you know, we can repeat it to a blue in the face, but we will continue to do that, or red in the face, I should say. Because we are not going to let down on making sure that the people out there, not just here, all over the country, are served in the way that they ought to be, and that is by a police service that understands challenges facing our different communities, particularly in the city urban areas where the volume of people, the different backgrounds, communities, therefore requires a real delicate balance, which we'll know as councillors.
Yes.
If we do our jobs properly, you realise that quite quickly, and the agility required from us is required in many cases life and death comes to place. So I wanted to make sure you asked that question to the Borough Commander in terms of what exact strategy they have in place.
Yes.
But please be reassured from us as political leads that we continue to push them on that because it's important. And you know, I think the challenge is if you're an organisation or of service that many existing staff have pretty low morale, feel disillusioned, disconnected, they see what their colleagues have done, and they think that's what I signed up for, why am I being tagged by this? We will, when our colleagues do naughty things, and everyone says, oh, politicians are the same, but I don't do that, I don't steal, I don't lie. But there's also, inevitably, there'll be that nonsense. And I suppose just making sure that we keep pushing the police, A, to try to improve morale, and we have a responsibility to a degree to do that. But it's also making sure that they ultimately get to the core, which is they've got to look like and understand the people they want to serve.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for continuing that continuum of having those frank and difficult conversations with them. I believe you wanted to come in and also.
Just on the recruitment, the Baroness report, that's one of the key findings. So it effectively reflects what you're saying. So I think the question that we'll need to be asked for at the next meeting, well, what are you doing about one, the lack of resources, which is what Joe's report refers to. Also, actually one of the key steps is to take rapid steps to end discrimination in implementing its recruitment, development and promotion processes. So it's about the culture of the organisation as well. It's not just about how you get people in. When people are in, it's how people from different communities are then treated. Do they feel valued? Are they promoted, etc.? So it's both the external and the internal that the Baroness is looking for the Met to concentrate on. In terms of powers, the report from Baroness cases talks about not abusing the powers that they've got, but it does actually call for more independent powers of the police hierarchy, specifically around disciplinary issues, providing the Chief Constable with the right of appeal to the Police Appeals Tribunal, enabling the Met and other forces with the clear legal power to reopen closed cases of misconduct investigation, changing police regulations to ensure that the failure to maintain or achieve vetting status is a grounds of appeal. So those are all to do with, you know, the potential issues that the police have in terms of managing things themselves. So there is some call for powers, but not to individual officers. It's more with the way that they deal, I think, with their misconduct and issues that they may have.
There's still an element and that ethos of the slap on the wrist opposed for
Yeah.
holding your feet to the fire and pay consequences, because we have seen in the media most recently about many officers who had raped women and done domestic abuse, and they were still operating because they had been through their own internal policies and procedures, and there was a conflict of interest. So, yeah, I'll leave that there, and then I'll bring in Councillor Harrison.
Thanks, Chair.
Harrison Stone.
Thanks,
And
Yeah.
Ian afterwards.
So I think mine, well, the common thread is the link between the council and the police, actually. I mean, the first thing is that I recall a number of years ago, I mean, back in the civic, when I was, when the chamber was open, we used to have regular sort of all councillor meetings with the police. I mean, perhaps multiple times a year. And I can't really recall since COVID, probably, us having really done that. It doesn't feel like it's restarted, and I know that we've been through different borough commanders actually since then, and actually structure changes and all that sort of thing since then. But I think that there is it's not just the community that feels disconnected from the police, it perhaps as councillors as well. So if we can get that going again and have those regular meetings with either the borough commander or, you know, perhaps a level or two down if it needs to be, because they're too busy. I think that would be really useful. It needs to bring stats and all sorts of things. Just on to kind of the work since the reports. Do you feel like the priorities of the council align with the police's priorities in terms of policing in this borough, and whether and are they focusing on the things that the council wants them to focus on, or do they set their own priorities and thank you very much for your input, but no thanks, we're doing our own job? And similarly, are there particular areas of the report that you feel have a more significant element to them for Haringey residents, or Haringey as a borough, or Haringey council, and do you see them working on that? And then just touching on community policing. I think that, I mean, it needs to be significantly better, but it seems like there is a sort of a marked difference between community policing in one part of Haringey and community policing in a different part of Haringey, depending on who that police person is, or what the setup is, or what the historic knowledge is, or whatever. There doesn't seem to be a common thread in how they do community policing. I'm just wondering what the council can do to help bring a proper structure and look at, like, where's community policing working really well? Like, is there particular wards or particular areas where community policing is working, or particular estates, or whatever it may be? Take that and replicate it elsewhere, rather than what it feels like, which is let every community police team kind of just do their own thing in a very, very, very loose framework. I know there's like the state of the neighbourhoods meetings and stuff, but I mean going beyond that and learning lessons from different parts of the borough, or even from elsewhere in the minute.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Boyhouse, and several questions there. Firstly, the last all member meeting that I invited all colleagues to, 5 colleagues turned up. I was held in that room over there at the beginning of this year, and I was pretty pleased because we had the police and the fire commander, both of the president, and 5 colleagues turned up. Now everyone's busy, there's things going on and all the rest of it, but it their reaction was, what's the point of us coming if no one goes? So if there's appetite and we're going to get 25 people on, of course let's do that. And I've pushed back to those people who, you know, because you can host lots of meetings, you'll know this in your role, and people will then complain that stuff is not happening that didn't turn up. Now, I also understand professional timings, so I'm not being arguing about it, but equally, we can have whatever meetings people want. I just want people to be there, otherwise there's no point, because it'd be the same old conversation, me going as it was then, you but Joe just talking at people. And so, I mean, basically, I can recall as Charles Archer, Leicester, Red Rice. Is it Jameson comes that ring a bell?
Does.
Yeah, and one more. And we basically then pushed all the chairs back and literally sat in a row. Yeah, so that's not how I want Borough Command to be.
So maybe that if it's like a pre-group meeting, there may be better attendances.
Yeah.
For the first one.
Yeah, maybe.
And then there can be a little feedback about should we do this in 6 months and what do you want to see or something like that, just to get that
Yeah.
going again.
So we'll go in and think about how best that can work.
Yeah.
And what we can maybe tag it onto. So for example, there's a emergency, not emergency, well, emergency for council, patient to council.
Yeah,
Perhaps we can memorial for council. Maybe we could do half an hour, about 40 minutes before that or something. But that's probably where
That scenario.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go in. That's the first question. Well, I've got three. I think I should look at that long. So there may be more questions and numbers, but I'll answer them all. The next point around community policing, where does it work? And look, I think you're right. There are examples, and that's why I asked Councillor Banks earlier on the St Anne's setup. There are different views and experiences of different councillors from different areas of what their safe neighbourhood panel looks like, how that functions, the follow through to community buy-in, who the officers are, do they change regularly, do they follow up, do they give enough notice to go to meetings, I'm going to mine after this.
Sorry.
But better than me running late, people start running around saying I didn't run early. So right, there is an increasing concern about how we have a more cohesive approach and a more consistent approach. There are examples of best practice. I think the key thing is to buy in. Haringey Ward and Green Lanes with Ian. I'm saying this because you're about to ask me the next question, Ian, but you are a good example of how that partnership can work really well. And actually, if you have that community buy-in, it's that kind of self-imposed. If you buy in, it's going to work. Unless it works, you don't buy in, right? So it's how do you get to the place where that becomes true across the part. And actually in areas where there's been, on a numbers data perspective, more need and more instances of criminality, you tend to have fewer people turn up to the safe labour panel, indeed, if it meets at all. In other areas where crime may be lower, you'll have 40 people turn up. Areas that you may spend more time in than I do, Councillor Collie Harrison, but that tells you some of that mismatch. And I raised this with the neighbourhood superintendent a couple of weeks ago. She's looking at what we can do with that. For example, I asked a couple of questions like, can you tell me who all of the names of all the officers in each of the wards are, please? So that that's to tease out. If they are there, great, we've got it. If they're not there, that also shows us where we need to do a bit of work. So we are doing lots of this stuff in the background, and it is a real priority, particularly because the Commissioner has indicated that community policing has got to be priority for him, and New Met for London, what all that looks like. Well, that's not really unless they see and feel objective, relatable, accessible, also objective police presence in their wards, right?
Do you get feedback from the Met on where it's working? Because I mean, we don't have S&T meetings in Crouchland. You may be surprised to know this. We don't have them. They don't exist. We don't have a chair. We don't have anything. We've not met for. I mean, we meet when I arrange something and it's ad hoc because there's been a request for it over something, right? It's not like there's a rate. It's not like Haringey Ward far from it, or just for example. So it's very different where we are, and I'm just wondering whether the council is even aware of that, whether they get that.
So feedback from council is helpful. I mean, I've gauged that just by you just see and feel that, and you just see when you have Safe Neighbour Association meetings, you can kind of hear the ad hoc, oh, this is happening there, this is happening here, and you can also hear where it's not happening. You also indicated this to me previously too. So, council of the eyes and ears. I've done this for 9 years now. I think like you, quite. So I'm 80. We are the best places to feed that stuff back. So if there are issues or problems, tell us, so we're able to feed that in at least. A couple of people have raised concerns more recently, which is why I got in touch and raised the points I did, and I'll happily, when I get an answer that's relevant and comprehensive enough, I'll share that to assure you that that's what we're looking at.
This is going to be the last question.
Yeah, it's not so much.
The two questions were: do the police priorities align with the council's, and are there particular areas of the reports focused on?
So there's two parts to this. One, yes, because our priorities are dealing with where there are hotspots, where there are trends, where there are increases, where there are particular concerns, whether it's women's safety and domestic violence, or parks, or whether it's other forms of criminality on the streets, or businesses, or alcohol induced or drug induced. They respond to them, and that's of course will have an effect on us as the council when it comes to ASB and the general sense of keeping people safe. In many ways, the proactive element of policing and community safety will be that soft stuff, a bit like the safe neighbour panel. But in terms of the crude, hard priorities, it's got to be responding to what's happened, and then working out what it was, and then making sure that you do what you can to stop it happening anywhere else. So yeah, I think broadly they do reflect the same priorities. The other element to this is, and I hope all four colleagues here who are elected responded to the community safety and hate crime strategies, because that's a unique opportunity for us to help shape what our priorities are, for us to then go back to the police and say, this is where we're at, this is what we think needs to be addressed, this is what our people are telling us. So there's the council-led bit to this. There's also the data. You've got to follow the numbers. And you then have to obviously follow instances and try and make sure that we have that comprehensive and coordinated response to things, so that we cover things off. So yes, broadly, they also change constantly because of the nature of the task before all of us. But the overhead values of keeping people safe, being able as a young person to go about your business and do your thing without knowing, to be a shopkeeper, not because of having windows done in, there's a no new way from me in your ward, whether it's a woman who lives in a park late at night, whether it's you know, a young gay couple to be able to walk safely through our streets, not be victim to homophobia, to be a black boy and not be chased because they think you look a certain way rather than you've done anything. So all those values apply to us, and they are our priorities as elected politicians, and we help make sure that they become the priorities of the police. And this review, to answer your second bit of question, this review and its recommendations, which we accept as every other key stakeholder has, which again goes back to the question I was asked earlier. It's a healthier way of answering it than got a few questions in my view, but it allows us to have, I hope, a mature conversation about how we can address all the issues that come up to us regularly. So there are, and I don't for a minute belittle any instance of time a person experienced, but there'll be low-level stuff that happens in wards, whether it's, you know, someone keying a car, or whether it's someone's taking stones off the wall or whatever, to crude, hard criminality. And we need to make sure that both examples of that, which will impact that particular person in a very serious way, because that's their life, that's their wall, that's their car, that's their family member, that's their business, feels that they get the buy-in and service from us as councillors, the council, and we are, but also the police are able to respond in a way that we would all expect when we pay our taxes. So the recommendation of the report, when it comes to tackling the instances of bigotry, for want of an umbrella description, of course we all want to engage with grace. The elements of the community policing that the chair referenced earlier, you all have actually, about it being relevant, accessible for people out in their communities, is also important. But then there's a wider thing about making sure ultimately the police have this job and people feel safe. And you know, we can talk around things, we can ask questions in a certain way, we can, you know, look for the killer quote, but ultimately we need to make sure that they do their job properly. We all have responsibility as elected people to help do that. And I hope the message through all of you elected members tonight to both parties is, you know, the next time Adam sends an email coming about command and turn up, right? Because the more we're in the move, the more we say, the more we speak, the more they hear. And, you know, they will no doubt be bored of me, the leader and the chief executive, and Hubris and Joe and Gavin and others talking at them. But we're not going to stop talking at them. The more people who talk with us, the better.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's funny being in and this is a reflective point now, you've got me going past Billy Houghton. But it's funny being in this particular position when you look like me with my foreign name, because you're almost in some ways made to feel you're there to explain and defend and protect them. That's not my responsibility.
Yes.
And I'm not going to do that because I'm not here to do anything. I'm here to just make sure they do their job properly. And that I will do until, you know, it's bedtime, until I start the next day. But the the odd political game and the mixed messaging and the confusion that some people think is helpful and funny actually stops us all doing what our responsibility here is, which is as civic leaders to make sure that all elements of public service, in this particular context, the police, do their job properly. And I'm not going to give you lots of words to answer your question. Yes, the recommendations to which I've just referred are important, and we're going to keep pushing on those along with all of them. Yes, our authorities fall in line with the police, and we're going to keep making sure that they do as we go forward. But ultimately, there's a civic responsibility leadership point here for all of us. And unless we're in the room having honest conversations, we're going to get the results for our people that we need.
Thank you very much, Adam. And last but not least, Ian.
Yeah, not so much a question as actually a bit of information, because obviously community safety is my particular thing.
We spent many happy hours together, you know.
It's why I'm here. First of all, I may be the only person in the room who was at that meeting at the end of July, which was actually very good. It was very short notice. And actually, the senior police officers here were not happy about that short notice.
To be fair, that's true.
Which, no, they said that to me, they said it to you. But in the event, there was over 100 people there. And it was actually a good meeting. I mean, obviously, the commissioner was there, some of his senior staff were there, Caroline, Rona were there from Harrogate. And the 100 people were able just to choose which table they would sit at. And there were different tables like violence against women and girls, community safety, stop and search, you know, you could just choose wherever you wanted to go. And then all of those tables had a thorough discussion, and then one member of that table then reported back, and the police were really just there to listen. They were not interfering, they were not pushing their own line, they wanted to hear what the community was saying. So I thought it was quite a good first off meeting. And as you said, it was impressive that the commissioner wanted to come to our one of the first. He can't go to every single borough's meeting because he'd just be not doing anything but he did choose to come to ours, so I think that was at least a positive. So that was a good first meeting, and as you said, there's more to come. With regards to numbers, a number which I've been given is that the Met are aiming to recruit 500 PCSOs, 500 new PCSOs over the coming months. That's their target. Was they get there's another matter, but that's their target. And that's in the light of what the case report actually said, which was, of course, as you know, that community policing has been a Cinderella for far too long. It's been under-resourced, it's been underfunded, it's been poo-pooed by many officers who saw it as the very last place they wanted to go. Yeah. And the good thing now is, I've been told, that when officers are looking for promotion, their superiors are saying, have you served in community neighbourhood policing? And if you haven't, then you need to tick that box before you can go any further. And that's a really good move to make sure that everybody gets that experience. So there is a definite change, I think, of emphasis towards community policing. And some of the sort of special treatment and funding and whatever that went towards the groups that were actually the ones that committed the most offences, that is to say, diplomatic protection, the armed forces, the parliamentary, they were the ones who actually came off worst in the case report. They were the ones who had the worst behaviour. Yeah. The best behaviour we often found in the community areas, which, because of the way it's run at the moment, was somewhere where officers went because they really had a vocation to be in the community, because it was looked down on, but they thought, well, sorry, I still want to do that. So hopefully this new emphasis will actually change how it's viewed. And there is definitely a bid to try and get more officers into neighbourhood policing. My understanding is that all the community teams are going to be increased in strength, hopefully by about the spring of next year. The New Met for London report does give a series of rather handy timetables for when these various developments are supposed to take place. So that's certainly something which I would want to ask the Borough Commander in November, how she sees that progressing, whether or not how are the 500 PCSOs going? When do you think each of our safer neighbourhood teams will have an extra, and so on and so forth? Because despite all of the problems that we do see, of course, from homophobia and racism and so on, as Adam said, the vast bulk of police officers, want to do a decent job. And I meet, like Adam does, because of all the different things, neighbourhood watch, safe neighbourhood law, police patrol, I meet huge numbers of police officers, and almost without exception, I found them really dedicated, hardworking, decent people. That's in the community policing area that I deal with. So really, I just look forward to the KC report, which at least has been accepted. And it's a very good report. And I think it works in our favour in actually wanting to put more people in the areas that we want to see them in. It's a very readable, but I'm sure everybody in this room has read it, but it's, for an official report, it's remarkably readable as well. Adding grace to like it is, isn't it? The new Met for London report also is very clearly arranged, paragraphed with a series of targets, a series of dates, and you can hold their feet to the fire. So that we can do. I hope that's helpful, but it wasn't a question, more some information.
Thank you. Yeah.
Chair, I'm conscious that I am off to my table in the panel meeting now. Just want to reiterate the seriousness with which we both acknowledged the contents of the review and the very serious issues contained in it, and also our commitment to making sure that we see that progress for our people. And I don't want to repeat myself, but the leader and I are not here to make excuses for others. We're here to make sure others do their job properly, play our role as community leaders. And on that basis, I'm happy to come back to the November meeting if that will be helpful with the borough commander. But there will be many operational questions, internal questions to which we won't have the answers, nor should we.
Yes.
Other than when we ask them questions, we expect honest answers back. But in terms of that lived experience, you require the police to be here to be honest and to be upfront about things.
Yes.
And there will be plenty of examples of so many different areas of life and work where one person or a few people do particular things or behave in a certain way, and everyone gets tired by it. And it's important we don't do that here, because this is the community we live in. It's important we keep it safe. It's important that the police play their really important role in building that trust, in being the honest and objective partner and player here. Because actually, ultimately, if they do their job properly, we're all going to be better off for it. And we need to remember that they're not the enemy. There've been some serious issues and some serious concerns that have got to be dealt with and addressed. We all, as politicians, have a responsibility to help them improve so they can do their job properly. And we shouldn't forget that.
And say that at a reachable end.
Absolutely, but we
are. They are paid to serve us.
Exactly my point.
They are paid to serve us. We are paid just like any other thing. All the services here, we pay our taxes, pay our national insurance to receive the service, which is palliative to us. And the agenda is to be joined up.
Thank you. And that's why I'm very pleased that you invited me this evening, Chair. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Adam, for coming. Thank you for holding your feet to the fire and continuing to have those really challenging conversations. And thank you so much for going after 7 o'clock. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
My meeting's finished, so I'll tell my decision.
Oh, God, so don't tell them to come to me. Thank you. Right, so can you respond then, please? You. We go to page 23, please. Street lighting and contract. Street lighting contract performance. Okay.
I'm the only one left, so.
If it wasn't you, it would be Ghostbusters. Thank you, and I believe that Mike is on. Councillor Mike Atherton. Deputy leader is online, and then somebody else. I don't know. Okay. Okay, thank you very much for coming. Can you hear us, Mike?
I can, thank you. Yes, I don't think I'm actually speaking to this.
I know you're not, but I'm just wondering if you can hear us.
Yes, I'm here, I'm following along.
Okay, and Joe, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So long as you both can hear, because I don't want to. Thank you. Right, so over to you, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Chair. through Marlborough Highways, our street lighting contractor, we've been changing all of our street lights over to LEDs every number of years. Pretty much there, we've been, that's been doing, as I said, for Marlborough Highways. Scrutiny have the contract to sort out the central management system. Although Marlborough Highways would actually fit all the nodes for the street lighting columns, but it was changed those over. So whilst all the highway lights have been changed, that's not necessarily the case on the rest of the lighting that we find around the borough. In the housing estates, there's still quite a few of those to be changed over to LED. It is suggested, which Robbie Irvin from a couple of years ago to suggest if they wanted to do that, it cost about £1.5 million just to finish off that progress. So rather than actually doing that in one stock and barrel, we're just doing it on a gradual basis, depending on how much houses can afford to just progress that. However, one thing we did was looked at the situation of the lighting in parks, and around about 70% of the lighting columns in parks were beyond their desired age, their intended age, and was starting to show lots of signs of corrosion. So for that reason, we put in the bid for some capital funding for about 900,000 to change over all of those lighting columns and to put LEDs on there, and for those to also be filtered into the central management system so we could actually remotely track those. That investment was separate from the investment we've got for putting in a lighting system into Finsbury Park on part of the roadway through there. And that work is going to be started later this year, depending upon when we get UK Power Networks in there to connect to the lighting on that. So in terms of the current situation, we know that there is a problem which is flagged up in paragraph 4.2 with a conflict between the central management system works and the LED lanterns working. And the problem seems to be within the lantern tray. So in many cases, we have to change over some components within those lighting columns, which are at the moment, when Marlborough Highways go out and check all the lighting columns during the day, it shows that they've actually repaired the fault. However, then the central management system then shows it not working, or working as the case may be, but the light might still be out. So we know there's an inherent problem here, and we are picking this issue up across the borough in a number of locations. As said in the report, we've given Derbyshire until November to sort this problem out, which has been going for quite some time. We don't want to get too far into winter before this starts becoming a major problem, because at the moment it's still quite light until about 8 o'clock. But during the summer, it hasn't got much of an issue. It's sorry, only 10 to 8. So we know this is an issue. We are putting pressure on Derbyshire to get this issue addressed, but it is a problem at the moment for that system. And because we are having repeat visits from Marlborough Highways to these lighting columns, it's then affecting Marlborough's 7-day responses, which is shown in the table of performance in the report. Other than that, prior to this issue, where we were coming up with a central management system, we were more than happy with the performance from Marlborough Highways street lighting crews. It's actually quite a difficult area to resource. I've looked after my own DSOs in the past and other authorities, and getting hold of electricians who are qualified to work on street lighting is really hard. So we've never really had a problem at all with the resourcing from Marlborough Highways. But when it comes to component issues, that becomes a problem. The report also reflects that in terms of the, this has come up earlier than that because there's been a problem with the delay in getting hold of the components for the central management system. And that really came out during the start of COVID and the period beyond, where it was really difficult to get hold of components, in part linked to the Ukraine war as a knock-on effect, with all sorts of deliveries in the engineering sector. So there are a number of things that have really come to a point now where I know with corresponding Councillor Corley Harrison in relation to a lot of the lighting column picked up by Dr. Pack, where markers are going out and trying to repair it, think they've repaired it, and then come back out, and we find that in actual fact they're not working as they thought.
Okay.
So in overall terms, we're happy with the performance of Marlborough Highways. We're not overly impressed by what's going with the central management system at the moment. It is a problem where we should look into tackle. But I'm happy to take any questions or take points back to the team, because I am actually challenged quite a bit on this particular issue. And Tom Henry is the group engineer, sorry, for highway maintenance. Tom has become a lot more involved in this in the last month or so, because him and Sue, it's really been left to Ken Weeks to try and sort out. Ken's the head of the street lighting team, street lighting manager, but we've upped the ante. Tom's more involved in this, starting to press both Marlborough in terms of their resourcing. I think we actually had a personal change in the last week or so, but press Marlborough, but also to press obviously the other Friday. So he's very much on their case, very much on my radar.
So I want to ask the first question, which is about they attempt to resolve these by November 2023.
Yeah.
Are they on target and have they given you any updates? Have you seen that?
Like this report was written only last week.
Okay,
So in the last week, that's why I know there's been a personnel change within Marlborough. And I think that person is actually going to be on the Schreier's case more so than there's been in the past.
okay. The other question I'd like to raise is violence against women and girls.
Yep.
Really important that the streets are lit.
Absolutely.
And what I have noticed in my constituent is that some of the lights are not working and they are quite dark going down the road. You see different parts of the Bartley Road M15 which are not lit, and the houses are very big and there are trees and stuff like that. So it amplifies that level of anxiety. So I'm just asking, when we see that roads, some of the constituents have come to tell me in my surgery or sent me emails to say that they've noticed that but actually some of them did in the summer, anticipating that it's going to get dark and they were worried about their children coming home from school. So when there are lights that are not working, what's the process?
Well, Marlborough Harvest go out there and try and fix the problem. If there can be another reason why the light might be out, there might be a faulty LED light, might be another part of the lantern that isn't working properly, in which case they will change that. If there's conflict between the LED and the central management system, they do try and fix it, but obviously what we're picking up there's a more fundamental problem here. However, what also happens is you get a UK Power Network supply fault, in which case Marlborough go out and try and advertise to get the street lighting back into operation, but after about 3 attempts, at first it becomes quite clear there was a power supply issue. That gets referred to UK Power Networks, and basically they have 28 days in which to put that.
So they've got 28 days. That's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, so that's covered up in paragraph 5.4.
Okay, 5.5.
But even they try and change the fuse over a few times, and if there's an ongoing issue, then they'll start to do some excavations into finding out what the problem is with the main supply.
Thank you so much. Here inside, and then councillor.
Yeah, I think
Talk about the same.
I think Gina and I had the same thing. Gina has had and I've had complaints from throughout Haringey Ward about the amount of time it's taking to actually fix these lamps. I'm aware of one right at the northern end in Raleigh Road, one at the centre in Warren Road, and one at the south in Lothian Road North. So that covers, the entire length of the ward. And we're talking about periods of 2 months in some cases, which I think is just totally unacceptable.
To that very quickly, we also have a drug problem in the area. Drug dealers, certain roads, they go there and they openly deal with it. And when the lights are not working, it's easier for them and it's more scary for the local people. So we're on the same issue.
Yeah. And all I can do is apologise for the length of mistake. We'll issue a works order to Margaret. They'll go out and they'll correct it. And it seems to be in lighting. And then the report comes back that in actual fact it's not in lighting. So that feeds through our complaint system rather than anything else. And that's been a real irritation. I've got emails from Councillor Brabazon in relation to the Haringey Ward, which I've got to go back to her on and explain to you what I was, and explain to her rather what I was explaining to you this evening. This is an ongoing issue.
Presumably residents have been waiting as long as 2 months. You can't, it'd be too onerous to contact them individually and explain that you know.
What we do is, if we've got the details of that, then we do try and go back. So if we get a complaint through from an individual, we will go back to the individual. That's part of our complaints process. So, and I get to see every single one of those, which is why I'm particularly aware that this is becoming an exaggerated issue over a period of time. And that's why I've gone back a few times to Kent and said, you know, is there a more fundamental issue? And at first it was a case of no, which I think is a problem with some of the components. Now it's been recognised as a much bigger issue, which is why it's actually now looking at its detail and people who are in addition to this sort of law.
I mean, we've corresponded on this a lot. I'll raise from 2 months to 9 months. But when when did you become aware that when did it become a CMS issue rather than individual street light column issues?
I think it really got picked up. I was just really concerned about what was going on. Following on from the last Scrutiny panel meeting, I went back and asked some questions because obviously we did talk about that at night. I said, look, there's got to be something more to this than just individual faults that are happening on a regular basis and our inability to get certain items back into operation. And I spoke to Tom about that. Ken, I don't see it till I've never actually met Ken in person. But Tom, I will see on a regular basis. I've known Tom for a long time. I said, look, we've just got to get on top of this. This is an ongoing issue. We've got to really work out what the problem is. And it was really through his investigations, working with Ken, really looking at all the detail, looking at the data, really finding that there's a more fundamental issue. And then sending it around to Margaret and how capable of finding the operations guys and the managers, you know, what do we find? Really getting the full picture. Then with that, and going back to Schreider, our other contractor, and saying, right, get this all.
Yeah, so very, very recent.
Very recently, yeah, so back in July, before I set up really after the screening, I was where we were, and I wanted to make sure that something happened before I went off on leave at the beginning of August.
Because I think, I mean, certainly my frustrations are, I mean, I said to you before that I think Ken, maybe just this year, but it feels like it's just him that's been dealing with this issue. Yeah. God forbid if it was, then for him. But also that, you know, you would report something, you would chase something, you would be told it's the reason it's
hugely
it
frustrating.
would be fixed next week.
Yeah.
And then actually the case would be closed. In essence, I mean, we don't see that, but in essence, it would have been closed off in the system because no one's checking. And then you go a month later and go, what's going on? It's still not fixed. Yeah. And it's, oh, someone did attend. They said it was fixed, but it wasn't. And certainly in the kind of the correspondence, particularly on all of the ones that Dr. Pack was raising, but there are others that have a collective problems that they have raised. It transpired that we're supposed to have some and effectively every single day reviewing columns and seeing which ones are or out at night on a twice yearly basis. Every column will be checked, or something like that. Was
you normally have night patrols, you know, pick up on those in addition to actually having
checking what's been raised.
So make sure there's correlation between the central management system and what you're seeing in person.
But from the communication that I have seen, that's not been done for starters, particularly in areas which are key issue areas. So maybe they have higher crime rates or their town centres or whatever. That, for me, a bit like with the drains, should be done more frequently because they would be considered higher priority part of the walk, exit, those things. But that doesn't feel like it's been done. And there just seems to be a miscommunication between what's being reported back from Marlborough or the system and what's being reported back to the end user. And it comes across a little bit like we're saying this is not working, and the council comes back as computer says it is. Okay. And it's like, yeah, it is not, it is, we're telling you it's not working, or you didn't tell us the right column number, or the blame goes back. And I think that shifted the last couple of months, and maybe because of the CMS thing. But for the first 6 months of this year, that was the culture. Yeah. It was kind of the blame, the blame. And I put some on the app today as I was walking here. I've raised some day burners, and I'm sure I'll walk back and see some that are out and raise them again. I don't even go back and check them because I know they're not being fixed. You know, I had one that I emailed you about that's still from February or March, or whatever. I haven't had an update on that for 3 months.
I think I got an email on that one from Ken.
From Ken, yes. I mean, I don't know with this, but I've been given that, you know, maybe 5, 6 different reasons why it's a day burner. And so my concern is perhaps you think it's now a CMS issue and then that's fixed, but actually it's not resolved. And who's actually going out there and checking that, you know, the original fault wasn't the fault, or it wasn't something else, but it is mold, we're doing a good job, or, you know, whatever it is, because there's just so much conflicted information over the last year.
Yeah, so Tom is all over this like a rash. Mainly because after the last scrutiny panel, I went back and said to him, look, we look incompetent here.
Yeah.
And that's not a position I like to be in. I've been involved in LED conversions and the implementation of central management systems for a decade. I've never had this problem beforehand. And that's why it just seems strange that we're just getting all the big issues. And with that claim, I said, well, I'm not incompetent, but there's some level of incompetence here. I want you to look into this. I want you to get to the bottom of it. I want you to put it right. So I've made that very clear in terms of my expectations, and that is now being addressed.
Yeah.
It is hugely frustrating. I don't get a great deal of joy about looking at complaints about street lighting still being believable.
Yes.
So, it could be like for a year. Yeah, and I've actually shared that frustration with Tom and others in that team, just so they know to actually get on top of this. And so, in answer to your question, what I'm expecting Tom to do is actually make sure there's a real track record of where Marlborough go around, do the work on the lighting column, perhaps in association with the Schreider, sort out the individual problems, and he's confirmed that they've actually resolved this issue properly. Because part of what there's more strands to this than just the point you chair about that lack of lighting at night.
Yeah.
We've got an unreliable system, you know, which we paid a lot of money for. We shouldn't be in that scenario. Central management system should be aiding us to be far more effective in terms of our street lighting maintenance. And we're seeing that in terms of that report table, in terms of that 7-day performance market. They've been pulled off and had to do all the wrong things. What we'd much rather do is actually have those resources doing a slick operation. And as a result, we're focusing in on putting in new lighting columns where we know we've got gaps. We did the commonplace exercise earlier this year to find out where people feel that we have different lighting columns. We started the process of putting those in, but if we're spending all our money on maintenance issues and going to look up basically chasing dead ends, you know, that's not using our money in the most effective way. So I want to go on some of this as possible. Actually, next start making some work.
As a kind of a learning thing, and particularly for you as head of service, there's a
Don't downgrade me over this.
head of the service area that sits with them. I can't find the figure now, but I think you put in the report the figure of open cases, or it was somewhere. Do you see that? Was there not a kind of an alarm point? You know, where last year we only had 20 and now we've got 120, and
I don't see that level of data.
Okay.
I've not been involved in the performance management of Margaret Direct. That's where it's play. And Cunningham to a certain extent would be overseeing it, but that's only in Peter Bobby, who is Tom's manager, who's
Yeah.
us and whatever it is. But that installation.
that didn't happen recently. No one seems to have done that. It seems to have come from councillors rather than managed.
Which I'm very grateful for, because it meant I've actually been able to go back to the service and say, right, get this problem sorted.
I think
It's frustrating.
I get that. I'm just thinking of in a wider frontline world, you know, covering everything, whether those reports, the stats on those reports, you know, for example, with the gullies, lighting, whatever it may be, when there is a number that starts going up, so, and someone in it, whether it's your level or wherever it is, there's a red flag, and it goes this area.
The flag now exists because what I've asked for is for the KPIs associated with street lighting to become far clearer. So I know what's going on in relation to the performance of Marlborough. To see that down at 50% was a bit of a shock.
Right.
About 90%, and even in terms of the highway side, you know, our highest performance for Marlborough's has been above 90% as well. I think that's a real eye opener. And I think it helps.
Took the contract if you don't have the.
Yeah, those sorry, councillor, the KPIs did exist, but they weren't being monitored regularly.
Okay.
So for that reason, that's where Tom got involved. Well, if they were being picked up by Ken, they won't be flagged through to sort of more senior management.
But you're still thinking at a performance level, so they may have done a really good job of fixing them. You wouldn't have known actually the number of faults had gone up based on just the reporting of the performance. So they may have been dealt with them quickly.
But what had I known that 50% before, my immediate question was why is it so low?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That led to the identification of what the resources have been diverted to deal with these issues.
Yeah.
There's so many. Why are there so many? That's because there's a conflict between the central management system and the LED. What's being done to resolve that? So there's a sequential process to go through once you see those KPIs. One of the things we've actually asked for is for our development director management team, we get that these data through coming through. So I'm hoping after November, this is not going to be an issue.
You have a back office system that manages the number of open faults for street lighting, number of open blocked drains, number of open, all the frontline things, number of open potholes. You have the system that manages it, and you could trend that and see.
Yeah, and that's what I've started asking to see on a more regular basis. That's why I know about the performance on the highway side being above 90%, because I've seen that.
Yeah, okay.
Street lighting I haven't seen before. Seen on more regular basis.
Yeah, want to make sure that the other areas, 39% of their potholes rather than. Okay, all right. I think it improves.
Any more questions? Okay, so then we're going to move on.
Good.
Yes. So you're speaking, we're going to move on to members of climate community. This is to do an update of the electric vehicle charging as page 1 to 4, and that's on your additional. Do you have it? Do you know?
No, I don't have them.
Should have a supplementary paper.
I don't know the shares. Thank you.
I got an email, I have that, but it didn't get added to the.
Issue manager, but.
Normally there's an addendum to cover with the agenda, like that's
It's on the website.
right. Just double checking, yeah, okay. I did get it by email.
So,
Presenting the report.
I'm happy for Joe to present it.
Okay, Joe.
But right,
Can you present the report, please?
Yep, certainly.
Thank you.
So this is an update to scrutiny on the electric charging infrastructure that we have in the borough. So just to go back from the main point, why are we doing lots of electric infrastructure charging in the borough, is that we have as an organisation made a commitment to improve air quality in the borough and to reduce our carbon footprint. The predominant air pollution in the borough comes from the combustion engine vehicle, found in vehicles, roughly 50%. And this is why we're doing this. And at the moment, we're seeing a significant increase in ultra low emission vehicles or plug-in vehicles. In August this year, 1 in 3 vehicles bought new were a plug-in vehicle, so a pure electric car or a plug-in hybrid vehicle, showing that there is a significant growth in this sector. So the council has currently 3 types of electric charging points infrastructure. These are rapid chargers. These will fill your car up, as it were, within between about 4 hours to get a full tank or less, depending on the charge. Going up to standard rechargers, which are roughly will fill up overnight and then give you a full tank of fuels then. And we also are now we've introduced some lamppost chargers, which again, like the standard ones, will take overnight to charge as well. We have a number of providers in the borough, BP Pulse, Source London and Chargy, who do the electric charging infrastructure. and we're currently out for procurement to provide to ensure that we've got providers coming over the next few years, as well as most of these contracts are now coming to an end in that. We have an action plan which sets out the delivery of these charging points across the borough. These are based on on-demand response. The council is very conscious of putting in infrastructure ahead of demand and then being chastised for putting in infrastructure and it never being used. So there's a risk around that. So therefore, what we try and do is we form clusters of residents who are either considering or purchase an electric vehicle, and then focus delivery of infrastructure around those communities. And we have set out in the corporate delivery plan an ambition to deliver 400 bays within the next this electoral term and under this council, and we're currently on target to do that. We are also looking at other technologies as well that might be more appropriate, including drivers who may not have a driveway, because one of the complaints that we sometimes get is that if I don't have a driveway, I'm not getting the benefit of cheap electricity, because it is cheaper to charge up from your domestic source rather than rely on public infrastructure. Looking at see if there are ways that we can facilitate that to ensure that there's an easier way or cheaper way for residents to charge up. The council has always kind of taken the view that actually shared community infrastructure is cheaper, is safer, but we can understand that there is in the cost of living concerns, if there is options that we can consider to alleviate the pressure of filling up your vehicle with energy. And this paper basically sets out all of what I've just said.
Thank you very much. Now,
Thank you. Just one question, Chair, if I may. And this is to clarify something I've seen in my ward. Jean Adam, I don't know if you could see me, Haringey Road. I have seen somebody charging their car. They had the sash window open, the wire was coming out of the window, over the pavement, gone to the car, and they put some sellotape or whatever those grey white sellotapes over the wire on this pavement.
Duct tape.
Is that what it's called? What my question is this allowed? I mean, surely must be some kind of guidance what people can do or not do. And I saw it, in fact, I was with my son and my son-in-law in the car and said, could you slow down? I want to look at this because it was coming from somewhere else. I couldn't believe what I saw. So the question is, as a council, if I see they can report it, is the council responsible to go and speak to them? Is there any kind of, I don't know, kind of
guidelines?
Yeah.
Because it sounds to me, what you're saying, Gina, this is a fire hazard.
Well, I think it's dangerous.
It's not a fire hazard because people be walking across.
It's not a fire hazard. So in terms of what you're describing as an offence under the Highways Act,
Okay.
which section is 156 or something like that. Anyway, it's an offence to actually trail a cable across the footway. So what some people have done in the past is actually put that into sort of trunking you might find in an office, for example, put that across the footway. That also is illegal. The only way to do this in a legal sense is by actually having a channel that goes across the footway, but that's got to be cut in so it's actually smooth. Now, this has been trialled in some places around the country, and that's what's been referred to in paragraph 2.3.2. But if someone was actually doing that out of their window, trailing that cable across, that's an offence, and that's something that a hires officer should be able to go out and actually stop, because the danger isn't about electricity in the shock; it's about people tripping over the cable, or even tripping over the duct-taped cable. So that's a health and safety issue.
It's not far from where I live. If I see that again, where do I report this?
So you just report it through to us so that we know which address it is, so we can go and check on it. But that is illegal to actually do that. And this is part of the problem of the growth of electric vehicle car purchases and local authorities around the country not being able to keep up with the pace of this. Because whilst Joe is actually talking about fast chargers, the sort of tower chargers charging off for lighting problems, to actually put it out for lighting column, most of the time you have to change the lighting column, so it's not a cheap option. Some you can actually drape out of the lighting column, but then you go for the right column to actually fit it to. So it's actually quite an expensive process. There are some grants that come through from government, from OZ, I think it is, to actually help with the rollout of this. But yeah, as a country, we've been very slow in following this through. In relation to this type of slot approach that it's actually been followed through by other local authorities, it can be done through Section 50 of the new Roads and Streets, which was about 1991, which allows private apparatus to be in the highway. But you've actually got the householder, for example, would have to pay to have the footway cut across. You'd want to actually put it in a joint between the curbs, otherwise you'd have to cut the curb as well. And it comes through at the top of the footway, at the top of the curb, and then drapes through in the channel, so you can actually do it that way. However, there would then be the supposition that the householder thinks they can always park their car outside their house to put the cable through there, and that you cannot do. There is no right to park your car outside of your own home. The public highway is for use of the public, not for your individual use. The only people who would benefit from that is those people who are dedicated to the parking bay. Then they know they can actually put it into those positions, knowing that. However, they would have to meet the cost of it. They'd also have to have public liability insurance, because what we also want to make sure is that they're going to maintain it. Now, the provision of these channels is very similar to what you find out on the street at the moment with terrace properties, where you have a downpipe from the roof, and it goes into effectively a drainage channel, which then discharges into the gutter. Now, that drainage channel going across the footway, that is not maintained by the local authority. That is the responsibility of the householder. And any accident that happens as a consequence of that drainage channel is down to the householder. And that's what most people don't actually realise. So in terms of signing up to this, they would actually have to, we'd want probably as a public liability insurance, as well as meeting costs, as well as an understanding that they, it doesn't give them a guarantee to park outside their home. So you can actually start to imagine that if you start putting these things in and people can't start parking outside their home, then there's going to be a real issue in terms of neighbourly disputes and everything else. Now, Andrew Burke, who's one of the leading parking projects teams, been looking into this, just trying to find out what other local authorities around London are doing. I think that Joe flagged up in an email to me earlier on that Waltham Forest, for example, said no, we're not doing this. So there's a genuine opposition to this across the country from lots of local authorities who do not want to go down this route. I've been asked about it from a Department of Transport perspective. There's a mechanism to it, but these are all the downsides. In terms of the way in which you'd actually put it across the footway, besides having to go through a joint in the curb, you'd also have to cut through all the paving stones, and you'd actually leave this channel in across the footway. So if any of the public utilities want to come down there and do any work on replacing the mains cables, whatever, they're then going to start snaking it under these things as well. So if you've got a whole series of these, it's going to become a nightmare for the public utilities to do it. And for that reason, that's why we're favouring the infrastructure you put on the street that anybody can use, which seems to up the pace at which we're providing.
I'm going to ask you a question. You did touch on driveways in relation to put a driveway, get a driveway. Drop to get one of those. I've looked and seen it because I'm getting the paving done on my road. It's beautiful, West Green Road, the whole pavement.
Does look good.
It looks like we're in Switzerland. It's just so, it's beautiful. I complained about it when I first became a councillor. Taking the time to get around to it, but it was absolutely marvellous.
I think we finished that work this week.
Yeah, it's really good. They were saying, some of the residents were saying, they're thinking about, their carbon footprint, etc. So why didn't you tell me what's happened before? I would have gone and asked to, drop. But they are driveways along there. And I'm just thinking, what is the expense? Because that sounds like a logical thing to work with the residents, for their driveway, so that the thing is by their door, they don't have to go across a pavement and you can just
Yeah.
use it that way.
So what we talk about is obviously that channel approach is for where you don't have the space to put your own off-road parking. Where you've got the space in front of your property to change part of your front garden, actually put a car in front. Part of the issue on that, and there's been a proliferation of that across the country
Okay,
in recent years, and that has actually added to the problem of flooding.
oh,
Because people will pave over their front garden, which has been porous, you actually get the rainfall going into the grass, refilling the ground in terms of water levels.
okay,
You start to pave over it, most people in part of them have not then put in a separate drainage channel, catch the water runoff to then feed back into the ground. Most of them just go from the property to the back of the footway. So the water then flows off the driveway, across the footway and into the sewers, which were built in Victorian times,
okay,
already couldn't cope. It's been adding to that problem. So as part of the Flood and Water Management Act, the intention was to limit the way in which that happened. And you'd almost have to, and you do have to get planning permission
Yes, you
around
do.
certain roads,
yeah,
but not necessarily on all roads. But when you do actually put that hard standing in, what we specify from colleagues in planning is that the material should be porous. So whilst you can still park your car there, the water still goes through that material into the ground still. But most people don't do that because most people actually employ a contractor. They'll come in and do a hard surface, which is not porous. That's the problem.
okay,
So there's a whole road load of issues along with that. So whilst it's better to be able to, get your car off the road and to actually do that in-house charging, and there are some knock-on effects as well.
okay.
So still a little bit.
So Councillor Harrison and then Ian.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm pleased, Joe, that you're looking at the channels because I think our group raised it as a full council motion and then a budget amendment, and councillors laughed at it both times. So it's good that Austin's taking it seriously and looking into it. And there are channels already in Harringay, not necessarily for that, but obviously we have channels across the pavement or the suds beds there, take it off of the road onto the suds beds. So they do exist. And I do think it is something that is very much worth pursuing. Just on the point about exclusivity and people feeling like it's their right. I mean, you order a crossover, you have paid for exclusive use of the road outside of your house because no one can park there. So that already exists by you being able to do it. So this is actually less severe than that. And that would potentially remove spaces from a CZ zone, and there's additional cost with that or whatever. But certainly in our budget amendment, we did use crossovers as an example of where the council would put all the cost onto the residents if they wanted a channel as part of the trial. So I think that's the way of doing it at zero cost, effectively zero cost to the council. Potentially, actually, there's an opportunity for profit there if it's legally able to do so. On the first point about the cable crossover, I think we're checking the legalities of that because I remember a number of years ago now, Councillor Morris, who might have been before your time, raised that because there was either a document or the council published something that said it was illegal to run the cables across. And actually, after quite a lot of scrutiny, it transpired that it wasn't. And the council had to withdraw that particular part of their, whatever it was that was being publicised. So it'd be really good to circulate the exact Highways Act, the contravention, I think, to all councillors so they were aware, because I remember that note got circulated at the time. And a lot of councillors were quite surprised that actually it wasn't illegal, and that's why action wasn't being taken by the council, and PCNs weren't being issued or whatever. So if we can have some clarity, because if it's gone one way or the other, we need to know. It's not just Harringay that has the issue, like you see it, or they go across the trees now and over your heads from vertical windows and all of that sort of thing. Yeah. One I was going to ask about, which probably I know that some of my colleagues have already raised, probably has come through to you, Joe, is about what Barnet have just done with these plug-in ones, the little cylinders on the floor next to curbs for you to plug a wand into, which I think they've only done in the last couple of months. I don't know whether you've seen that already, Joe. and whether that is something that we are exploring, because that seems like a good option. And then also my question is about the rollout of chargers. Without doing something that is going to bring infrastructure to people to be able to do it from their own home, we are just not going to have enough. 400 is, I mean, you would need, if everyone that owned a car was using an electric vehicle, you'd need at least 2 or 3 chargers on every single stretch of 200 meters or something like that. And we're just not going to get there. And one of the other issues that we have is that where charging points are being put in, as far as I'm aware, they're never being put in the middle of a CPZ strip, like a run of parking bays. So is that policy subject to change so that charging points can be introduced in the middle of a CPZ run? Because at the moment they're just being done at the end to avoid having to do a consult. I think the CPZ change consultation and all this sort of thing, just to break up a run.
I wasn't aware of that. I mean, Joe might have more of the detail on that one, but it's not something I've heard of. It's been a problem.
So I think, like, for example, if you wanted to introduce a cost crossover and you're in a CPZ zone, your costs doubles because you have to pay for a consultation, for the CPZ to be amended, to have a post at the end of one run and a post at the start of the next, the repainting. And that's why I thought that we weren't doing it in the middle of them.
And no one's aware of that.
No,
It's news to me.
Joe, still here?
Yeah,
Still there.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
still here. So several points. So there's lots of emerging technologies around that. I've just looked at Barnett's webpage. I can't see the hubs you refer to, but I know that there have been lots of curb kind of tortoise shells or little cupboards that you open up from the pavement that you open up and you plug directly into the pavement, and the plug's on ground level for that. We've looked at them in the past and we've ruled them out on accessibility, and actually the pavements are predominantly for pedestrians, and therefore having kind of a tortoise type structure on the pavement may be a trip hazard for people with impairments or mobility issues. And we've been quite keen to promote a wider inclusivity service. So all of our posts are of a certain height that has been approved. They have a wheelchair accessibility around them to ensure that people with wheelchair can still access them as well. And we also try and keep them off the pavement, and we build them in the highway. And the council was recently commended, as set out in the report, for being one of the few boroughs that had considered this in its design and implementation of EV infrastructure. But that said, we will always continually look at any emerging technologies to make sure it delivers best for the residents, but in an inclusive manner. Just to pick up some other things.
Yeah, just to make a note, it's called Trojan Energy Hubs, and they've just gone in Barnet, and they look completely level to me. So if you can make a note and go away and look.
Okay, we'll look. I've typed something into Google as I speak. So that's no problem. Trojan Energy, got it sorted. Thank you. Okay, so what we're finding is that whilst demand for recharging is going up, actually the cars themselves are becoming better. 5 years ago, you'd probably say the average recharge or full tank would probably be about 180 miles. They're now looking at about 250, going up to 300 miles for range. And therefore residents actually aren't demanding, once they've experienced the vehicle, the number of recharging points that we would often look at. So when we did the ultra low emission vehicle action plan, we set out that we expected kind of 4 or 5 users per point. But now what we're seeing, because of the increased range, actually that could probably double because of the range anxiety is becoming less. But we will review that as well, because it still sets a challenge for the organisation. And you highlighted about the CPZs and why they're putting it at the end of roads and things like that. One of the reasons that we do put them end of roads slightly outside of CPZ zones is to allow non-residential access as well as residential access to some of the points. And we are also finding that when we run consultations, if you've got an EV, you don't mind an EV charging point outside your front door. But if you don't have an EV and someone recommends to have an EV outside near your front door, you tend to object. So therefore, trying to put the EV infrastructure in places of neutral car parking areas at the end of the road, where no one it might be an end of terrace and no one's living directly outside it, is probably an easier way to deliver. So that's some of the thought process that we go through that, though. But we're happy to work with councillors to identify areas of high demand. Councillor Carter obviously picks up lots of residents through his portfolio, and sends us requests of what are we doing in these areas. Brilliant. We like the feedback, and it helps shape the current or the emerging delivery plan for EV charging points.
It's outside of the planning process for new builds. Is there a way of pushing or incentivizing private establishments with space, land to introduce these? Is there any schemes beyond just petrol stations, bringing them on for their forecourts? You know, like pub car parks, all these other things, rather than them just doing it individually, whether the councils are approaching them or anything.
So part S of building regulations is a new building regulations that started last year, requires that all new car parking spaces created have an electric charging point in situ. So that would mean that any new car parking associated with any new residential development will already have a plug. It's gone beyond the London plan or the Haringey policy, which was a leader in this space, so that all car parking places now have are ready for the EV revolution, as they say.
I mean, outside of planning, existing locations.
Oh, so retrofitting.
Yeah.
So retrofitting, we wouldn't have any. We have advice. So on our planning, on our website, we have EV advice for developers, householders, and highways engineers to enable them to make the right choices and informed choices. And we can push that message with estate managers or landlords. But there's no easy way into that market. And we know that our EV infrastructure planning notes and infrastructure notes are quite well regarded, and have been copied by other authorities as well.
All right.
So going back to the issue of the Highways Act, the section 178, which is entitled restriction on placing rails, beams, etc. over highways, and part section 1 of section 178 says no person shall fix or place any overhead beam, rail, pipe, cable, wire or other similar apparatus over, along or across a highway without the consent of the highway authority. And then we can actually put our own consent to it, giving such reasonable terms and conditions that we think fit. If the person contravenes subsection 1, which is subsection 4, he is guilty of an offence and liable to a fine at level 1 on the standard scale, which I think is about 50 quid. And if the offence is continued after conviction, he is guilty of a further offence and liable to a fine not exceeding £1 for each day in which the offence is so continued. Now, bear in mind that the Highways Act written in 1980, £1 is those. So that's which is people going back to the Department of Transport saying, I think you need to review your fines.
Yeah. Maybe I'll try and dig out the old email and see what's the thing.
Section 178 is the section. That's the relevant requirements the Department of Transport portfolio.
Yeah.
Sort of working to.
If I can find that, I'll send it on to you. The previous answer. It was before your time.
May I just come back? Sorry. Can I just come back on Councillor Corley Harrison's point about the Trojan the points? So just for clarity, the Trojan points, you get a key, you go into the pavement, or you plug in a mini stand, which is approximately, looking at the imagery, probably about 40 centimeters, 50 centimeters high, so about knee level to a grown-up adult. We will look into the technology because that's what we do, but I would suggest that there may be a bit of it's outside the peripheral vision of certain people, including myself, to be fair, and therefore could be a bit of a trip hazard. And until I've seen the full impact assessment of that and it's been signed off by various groups, I would be mindful of recommending it until we have clarity on that point. We have looked at similar infrastructure in the past, and it's always come back negative because of its wider community impacts.
Do you have contacts in Barnet you could ask about it?
Yeah, no, we will do, definitely.
All right, cool.
That visibility issue, I think is linked into, I think the Department of Transport, the document from 2020 is called Improving Mobility, which recommends you don't have any low level trip hazards. So I think, I can't remember, it's going to be at least 600 millimeters in height or a meter in height. But that's certainly what they look at to actually make sure you're not introducing something that someone who's partially or non-sighted would end up tripping over. So that would be the concern.
Very important. If any things that need removing, if it was.
Exactly, but I think it's 600.
Thanks. I think it's been sort of quite well covered already, but just to the point, given what you said, obviously these cables across the pavement, and given what you said about the channels and the pavement and the curbs and utilities and the public liability insurance, basically it's not going to happen. So therefore, I think we need to come back to the point about whether or not we think that the council's planned numbers of charging points are actually sufficient, because even allowing for improved efficiency of vehicles, you've got whole swathes of the borough where you can't have drives concrete, even if it were a desirable thing to do, which as we know it isn't. If you've got just rows and rows of terraced houses, there is no alternative actually but to rely on charging points. And the numbers that I've heard quoted this evening strike me as pretty inadequate if we have any ambition in this area. So what's your response to that?
That's what they do.
What's the option?
There, Ian.
Sorry, I lost that bit.
Oh, Ian.
Do you lose the whole spiel or just the end?
Just the end bit, please.
Well, the end bit was that given that the wires across the pavement, or indeed the channels into the pavement, is obviously a no-no, and given that there are huge swathes of the borough which are terraced houses and are never going to be relying on the curbside charging points, do you feel that the numbers of new charging points which are being proposed are adequate?
So the numbers that are proposed in the corporate delivery plan are in alignment with what we're seeing from the marketplace. So again, going back to that demand response on that. And because we're seeing a change in the technology as well by the car manufacturers, you don't have to recharge as often. Often, if you think about how often you may drive in the course of a week, if it's more than 300 miles, or if it's 300 miles, say, you may have to recharge once a week. But are you really driving that amount? And therefore, how often do you have to recharge your vehicles? Therefore, it might be that actually you only need to touch in with your recharging infrastructure once a fortnight, if it's 150 miles a week, or if it's 100 miles a week, once every 3 weeks. Therefore, actually, the infrastructure can change as the technology gets improved. We're also seeing a bit like with petrol stations, an increase in private companies who are looking to deliver super rapid hubs around London. I know that TfL are approaching us as well about delivering some rapid hubs like they've done, and they've got an example of that in the Woolwich, where they create a small coffee shop, use private land, and they have rapid recharges where you can recharge in a matter of 20-40 minutes, and therefore they believe that that's also a market opportunity for electric vehicle users. Whilst the costs are more expensive than using your own domestic charge at home, they plan and should be still cheaper than filling up your car with the alternative, which is diesel or petrol vehicles. So therefore, there's still an economic case to be made for the infrastructure. I'll hand over to Councillor Carter.
Yeah, thanks. I haven't got much to add there, Joe. I think you covered it. I think the reality is that at the moment the onus is on local authorities to deliver their infrastructure along with private sector. And I think, the government is beginning to increase subsidies because actually the level of demand, especially considering government legislation and the fact that the internal combustion engine is essentially being phased out, quite rapidly, we are going to see, I think, a huge expansion of that central government subsidy, and an expansion therefore of the infrastructure, not only on the streets, but as Joe has pointed out, I think we are going to start seeing what are essentially petrol station style infrastructure going in for super fast charging. And it should be noted that we have some of that infrastructure in Haringey. So where the off Ferry Lane, next to the bus depot, we're sort of connected up to the bus, which is, I think, one of London's largest EV bus charging depots. In fact, we've sort of connected to that infrastructure, and people can actually pull up and charge there using the super fast charging infrastructure. And I think we're going to start seeing more and more of that. So we're doing our bit, and like Joe said, there's 400 points going in for 2020 by 2026. It's still not enough for demand, but I think we are going to see that change naturally just to meet that demand. Otherwise, actually, the country's literally going to grind to a halt. I mean, it should be noted on top of that we also are expecting to see a massive increase in different forms of getting around other than the private motor car. So one would hope, especially in cities like London, we're going to see, much more localized sort of, active travel choices, but also we do need to see the government invest in public transport more. So we need to see less reliance on the private motor car, but at the same time, we should see that infrastructure scale up to at least meet that EV demand as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mike. There's another comeback from Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, just wanted to make a point, which I think I made to you before, Joe, but I know that a lot of people don't use the on-street chargers because they have issues with source for whatever reason. You have to put deposits down, you don't get the money back immediately if the charge is not working, all that sort of thing. So they avoid them. I know that you are looking, obviously, at whether you can have multiple providers rather than just the one provider. I really would recommend pushing, if you want people to get on board, I think that choice is really important, because as soon as you're kind of anti one provider, and that's the one for your local area, you're never going to buy into public charging. And also there's just the whole, people buy a brand new car, which is what most of these are. They're very nervous about leaving it not outside of site. They'll come home from work, they're not necessarily going to around the corner to get charged, because there are a lot of theft in Haringey. And so that's worth bearing in mind as well, that there's going to have to be a real culture change for just people's preciousness over their vehicles. And I think that means that we're going to have some form of ability to offer private charging on Haringey roads, which are, as I mentioned, predominantly terrace, to be quite honest.
Can you come back on that quickly?
Yeah, no problem.
You don't need to, it's fine.
Okay, fair enough. I'll stay strong.
More of a point.
Okay.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you very much, Joe. Yeah.
There. Thank you.
Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
And we've got one last agenda item, which is the work plan. So the officers are excluded.
I'm closing down my laptop, don't worry.
Okay, we're not running you out.
No.
It's safety.
We've been downgraded already, and so that's
So in your wetland and cover report, so to know the work plan, and I need to suggest items for our next meeting. And given that we've got a flag will be here,
Yes.
the outline will be here, so will the agenda, the activity focus around. Is there anything in the budget?
That's it. I think that's.
I think we could allow as much time as possible on that.
Yeah.
Because that's a very important thing for our client.
So you basically have the police update. So what we'll do is we'll set out the police priorities, and then also we want
Yes. Yes. And because we have questions about what is their strategy to improve it. You know, I don't want Harringay just to be known for the uprising of 1985 and 2011, there's so much more to us. And we can turn that narrative around.
Well, we have so much. We have so much.
Can I talk about it?
What is the percentages between the support officers? You see, I'm aware that the support police officers are more formidable than police and the police themselves. It's like I remember years ago, as they go to school, all the support staff, the teachers who work in office, and the teachers themselves were, may I say, in English, you understand, everybody down. And just, I mean, my daughter is a teacher, every time my friend used to go in, they used to ask her if she was a sub.
They was a cleaner.
So, and you could see out the police, a lot of, you know, I'm glad to see them there, you know, the support officers from different backgrounds, but I would like us to see.
What do they have in that recently just for
In the police force as police officers,
Yeah,
because they have more power than the police.
we want to see career progression of global majority people that represent the community at large. And it shouldn't be just the high echelons. We're not looking for a pint of Guinness where the policing is, where all minorities are at the bottom, the people in positions of power. But that is the archetype of structural racism. That's what it looks like essentially. So what we're asking is, how are we going to address that within their system? So that we have fair policing and people. So that's good. I think that's a valid.
Get some good data in the report about
Yeah.
like the crime stats data and all that stuff. They'll have to hold that price.
There'll be crime stats, they'll be based around what the priorities are for the city partnership. And around that.
If we can have the historical, so we know what's going up and what's going down,
Yeah.
by comparison, because
Yeah,
it's all very well them saying we're focusing on this, but conversely, they're ignoring something else, and that's like.
But it's the trend. The trend is, it's historic.
Yeah.
And check that they send it in good time, not like 5 minutes before. So we've actually got time to read it and study it.
yeah, that would be great.
The last thing is to note the future meeting dates, which are published on the front page of the agenda.
Yes, the next one is the 6th of. Yeah. And what time?
6:30, but
Okay.
you can have it any time you like. No, we can determine.
Push it till 7 on that particular day.